I found the world a very interesting place, and I couldn't understand why the school wasn't at all interested in what I was interested in. So I left school at 16 with a few exams. I don't know how I passed them. I don't remember learning much for them. But I remember thinking, well, that was a waste of time. 5 to 16, 11 years of my life has just been wasted. I haven't really learned anything that was useful to me. I haven't learned anything about life. I haven't learned anything about jobs, what kind of careers were possible. I certainly haven't learned anything about the possibility of going to a university. It was all a complete waste of time. And I remember thinking, it shouldn't be like that. It must be possible to have a different kind of school where kids really want to learn stuff. And I thought how powerful it would be if the kids were really interested in what they did at school and they didn't spend most of their life frightened of punishments or frightened of not doing very well in the tests. Because all the time we were told, you have to do well in the tests. We were put in place order. That was pernicious. We were told who was first in the class, who was second, third, fourth. So I left school feeling that things should be done in a different way. And we worked in a psychiatric hospital together, not as patients, but we worked in a psychiatric hospital that was run as a democratic learning community. There were meetings every morning and every afternoon. And the treatment was basically learning to get on with other people, learning to express yourself, learning to learn about yourself. I found that really interesting. And I thought schools ought to be like this, really. They ought to give kids space to discover who they are. They should learn how to work with other people. And then the school should be run by a kind of a democratic meeting where everyone had a say and everyone had a vote. So I trained as a teacher. But that was a bit of a disaster too, because I found that in the training as a teacher, we didn't learn much about democracy in schools. What we learned about was behaviorism, Skinner and his rats and Pavlov and his dogs. And I remember saying to the psychology lecturer, I rather hoped I'd be a teacher of children. I don't really want to teach rats or dogs, thank you very much. Why aren't we learning about children and how they grow and how they learn? Anyway, the lecturer got a bit fed up with me and he said, if you like, you can go to the library. Because I'd worked in a psychiatric hospital and knew a bit about psychology, he said, you can go to the library and make up your own course, if you like. When I got to the library, I discovered an amazing shelf of books covered in dust that nobody read by this bloke, A.S. Neal, and about his school at Summerhill. And I started reading those books, and once I started, I couldn't put them down. And then I found other people who developed theory about this approach to young people. And I thought, this is what schools ought to be like. Schools ought to be helping young people grow up, discover their own interests, discover themselves, and leave school with a kind of vision of what they want to do with their lives. During the teacher's course, which I did for 3 years, every year we spent 10 weeks in a school. And the first time I was allocated a 10-week practice in a primary school in a very poor part of the city of Oxford. You think of Oxford as a rich place with lots of posh students, but in fact there's a lot of poverty in Oxford too. And I was allocated to the school in the poorest part of the town, the city. The head teacher was having big problems because some of his teachers were ill, and so he said, do you think you could manage a whole class? I said, well, give it a try. Will I be able to try out some of my ideas? I don't care what you do, he said, as long as you don't get complaints from the parents and as long as the kids don't run off. So I thought, wow, what an opportunity. So on my first morning with these kids, we sat in a circle. They weren't used to that. And I introduced myself by my first name. They weren't used to that either. And I said, is school interesting? And what would you like to do? And they came up with all sorts of things they were interested in. Most of the kids, one or two weren't sure what to do, but mostly they had very strong opinions about what they liked to learn. So I said, well, I can't teach all of you everything all the time, so you're going to have to find out a lot of this stuff yourself, which means getting books and whatever else we can get for you to learn from, perhaps going out and talking to people. Anyway, this was the beginning. I didn't know, of course, but this was the beginning of self-directed learning from my experience. And we made all the rules as I'd read about at Summerhill. We had a meeting every morning and every afternoon after lunch to say, you know, how's it gone for the last few hours, the last half day, and what can we learn from what's happened. And so we made class laws and then made a class court in order to enforce the laws when people broke them. And it all went very smoothly for my stint there. And at the end, my lecturer, my tutor said, that was great. Where did you get those ideas from? Because you certainly didn't get them from the college. The head teacher was very happy because parents began to show a lot of interest in what the kids were doing. And very often the kids would go home. I didn't set any homework, but they would go home and talk to their parents or often their grandparents about things that had happened to them in their lives. And then they'd come into school and that would become part of their project. My only real expectation of the kids was that towards the end of my time with them, they would present their projects to the rest of the class. Two reasons for that was, one is I thought they were very interesting and the other kids would be interested, but also I thought it would be great experience in communicating something they'd become enthusiastic about, sharing those experiences with other people. It would be very good for their oral English. Anyway, it was a great success. I got A++ for my teaching practice mark. The head was pleased, the kids loved it, the parents were pleased, and the college tutor was pleased. So I thought, okay, I quite like this teaching game. Maybe I'll stick with it. My second teaching practice, all the opposite things happened.